Sometimes I look back and wonder how I even did it. My life, for so many years, became this quiet, almost sacred devotion to Arthur. His illness just crept in, slowly at first. Then it consumed everything, demanding every ounce of my energy, every waking thought. I became his hands, his memory, his unwavering rock, sacrificing my own small pleasures and grand dreams without a second thought. It wasn't a burden, not really. It was just what we did, what I did, for the man I loved, the man who was my world. There were moments, of course, when the sheer exhaustion threatened to pull me under, but then I'd look at him, so vulnerable, and find another reserve of strength I didn't know I had. Our shared history. It was like a warm blanket I'd pull around myself on the coldest nights. I'd remember the spark in his eyes when we first met, the adventurous trips we took, the quiet evenings curled up with a book, simply enjoying each other's presence. Those memories were my anchors, the proof of a life truly lived, built hand in hand. Even as Arthur's body failed him, and the cruel reality of his prognosis loomed large, I clung to those beautiful recollections, finding a profound sense of purpose in my role as his caregiver. It wasn't just about prolonging his life. It was about honoring the incredible journey we'd shared, the promises we'd made, and the quiet understanding that had always bound us together. Our home, once filled with the lively sounds of a bustling life, now had a different kind of rhythm, a gentle hum of quiet care. Each measured dose of medicine, every carefully prepared meal, the gentle touch on his fevered brow, these were the silent acts of my unwavering commitment. Sure, the isolation could be profound, and sometimes a wave of weariness would wash over me, making my bones ache. But then I'd think about our future, the meticulous plans we'd made, the financial security we'd painstakingly built together, and it would spur me on. I truly believed all these sacrifices were worth it, laying a strong foundation for whatever was to come, a testament to our enduring partnership and the love that I thought was unbreakable. The air in the room just changed one afternoon, a subtle shift that I felt deep in my bones. Arthur's breathing, which had been so labored for so long, softened, almost imperceptibly. I was right there beside him, holding his hand, tracing the lines on his face, whispering every loving word I could think of. It was peaceful, truly, as if he simply drifted off to sleep, and I found a strange, grim comfort in knowing I was with him to the very end. My promise, my vow, had been kept, fulfilled in those last quiet moments. The days that followed were a blur of hushed voices and soft footsteps. Friends and family, they truly rallied around me, their hugs and kind words a much-needed balm for my raw grief. The funeral, though painful, was a beautiful tribute to Arthur's life, and I felt a quiet sense of closure knowing I'd honored him. Amidst the sorrow, a tiny flicker of anticipation began to stir within me. A new chapter, difficult but mine, was finally beginning. I just knew that all the hard work we'd put in, the life we'd built together, would now be mine to navigate, our shared assets securing my future. Looking back, I remember a few times in those final days, Arthur seemed a little distant, more withdrawn than usual, perhaps. But I just chalked it up to the illness, the pain, the sheer exhaustion of it all. Who could blame him? I dismissed any nagging thoughts, focusing instead on his comfort, on being present for him. There was so much going on, so much to manage, and I honestly couldn't imagine anything else taking up his precious last thoughts. Now, with the funeral behind us, the next inevitable step was approaching, the reading of the will, a moment I believed would simply confirm what I already knew was rightfully ours. The lawyer's office felt strangely hushed, almost reverent as I sat there, my heart a mix of lingering grief and quiet anticipation. I expected a solemn formality, a confirmation of what I already knew, that Arthur and I, as partners in life and love, had built a future together, and now it was simply being made official, The air was thick with unspoken condolences, a respectful silence. But then, Mr. Henderson, with his crisp suit and even crisper voice, cleared his throat, and the words that followed hit me like a physical blow, each one a hammer strike against my already fragile composure. "According to Mr. Arthur's last will and testament," he began, his voice devoid of emotion, "all of his substantial assets, the family home, savings, investments, everything, are to be bequeathed to Ms. Sarah Jenkins." My breath hitched. Sarah? Who on earth was Sarah? The name hung in the air, a foreign, unwelcome sound that echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. I must have misheard, surely. My mind raced, searching for any Sarah I knew, any acquaintance, any distant relative. Nothing. The confusion was quickly overtaken by a searing wave of disbelief, then a cold, creeping horror. This couldn't be right. This simply wasn't possible. The pain that followed wasn't just grief. It was a profound, gut-wrenching betrayal, cutting deeper than Arthur's death itself. My world, already teetering on the brink, crumbled beneath my feet. Years of sacrifice, of unwavering care, of putting my own life on hold, flashed before my eyes, culminating in this unbearable injustice. The lawyer continued to speak, offering a few cryptic details about this Sarah, mentioning an address, a date, but his words blurred into an incomprehensible drone. All I could feel was the icy grip of treachery, the devastating realization that the man I had loved and cared for so deeply had harbored such an unimaginable secret, leaving me with nothing but shattered trust and a gaping void. The initial shock, the raw disbelief, slowly began to morph into a searing, cold anger. My grief for Arthur was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a burning need for answers. Who was Sarah? How could Arthur, the man I'd shared my life with, the man I'd selflessly cared for, have kept such a monumental secret? I felt a desperate urgency to peel back the layers of his deception, to understand the betrayal that had just shattered my entire world. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every waking moment was consumed by this relentless, furious quest for the truth. I started digging, turning our familiar home into a crime scene. Every corner a potential clue. Old papers, financial statements, even the dusty boxes in the attic. Nothing was sacred. I found a hidden compartment in his old desk, and inside, a small, worn leather-bound diary, not his usual organized planner. Flipping through it, my hands trembling, I discovered cryptic notes, dates, and then, unmistakably, Sarah's name, scrawled repeatedly, sometimes alongside travel itineraries and subtle financial discrepancies that now screamed out at me. The realization that this affair had been going on for years, right under my nose, twisted my gut into knots. How could I have been so blind? I even started discreetly reaching out to some mutual friends, subtly probing, watching their reactions, searching for any flicker of recognition or discomfort when I mentioned the will, or even just Arthur's later habits. A few conversations, seemingly innocent at the time, now replayed in my mind with sinister new meanings. The long absences, the vague excuses, the times he seemed just a little too busy, all the subtle signs I'd dismissed as illness-related or just Arthur being Arthur, suddenly coalesced into a horrifying picture of a carefully constructed double life. My shock was now replaced by a chilling, determined rage, solidifying my resolve to expose every single one of his lies, no matter how painful the truth might be. After weeks of relentless digging, the puzzle pieces finally clicked into place, forming a complete, ugly picture of Arthur's deceit. The anger I felt was still very much present, a simmering fire, but it was now tempered by a surprising clarity. I realized that confronting Sarah directly in a dramatic shouting match wouldn't serve me. I needed a different kind of vindication. My focus shifted from emotional outbursts to a more calculated approach, one that would expose the truth and reclaim my dignity without descending into chaos. I knew my fight wasn't just about money. It was about honoring the years I'd given, about proving that his betrayal wouldn't break me.
Parents always had a special place in their hearts for my brother, Alex, and I spent my entire childhood trying to earn that same level of attention and affection. It was never explicitly said, but the favoritism was always clear. They would celebrate every little achievement of his, even the smallest accomplishments, while I was left to find my own ways to prove my worth. My brother was always the golden child. He could do no wrong in their eyes, and no matter how hard I tried, I was never enough to make them proud in the same way. I remember one of the most vivid memories from my childhood when I was about 12. It was the day I brought home my school report card, proud of the high grades I had achieved. My parents barely glanced at it. They were too busy preparing for Alex's soccer game that evening. They had forgotten it was the day my school had an award ceremony, but they never once apologized for missing it. Instead, they made me feel guilty for even bringing it up. "Don't be selfish," my father said. "You know how important Alex's game is." It was a moment that burned into my memory and stayed with me throughout the years, a reminder that I was always second. Over the years, this dynamic didn't change. It only grew more painful. As I entered adulthood, I started to feel the full weight of how emotionally manipulative my parents were. Their love, when it was offered, always came with strings attached. They'd offer praise, but only if I followed the path they dictated for me. If I veered off course, the support would disappear. I was constantly on edge, never quite sure if I was living up to their expectations or if I was just a placeholder in their eyes. Now, as an adult, the cracks in our relationship were more apparent than ever. My parents continued to support Alex, and yet when it came to my own milestones, my life, my achievements, they either dismissed or undermined them. They saw me as a convenience, something that was nice to have but never truly valued. And now, as I stood on the verge of yet another disappointing moment with them, I felt the familiar sting of rejection creeping in. Little did they know this time I was about to change everything. When my father casually dropped the news about Alex's new home, it hit me harder than I cared to admit. "Your brother deserved the new house. He actually has a family." "Your family doesn't matter at all," he said, his words cutting through the air like a sharp knife. He handed me a pair of socks, his way of telling me to move on from whatever resentment I felt. I stood there, motionless, trying to hide the storm brewing inside me. Alex, my brother, had always been the golden child. He could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, and this new house was just another sign of how much more they valued him over me. I had never questioned their favoritism outright, but today I felt the weight of it pressing down on me more than ever. The house, a symbol of my brother's success, was now another reminder of how little I mattered in their world. My parents, in their attempt to support Alex, had completely overlooked me once again, and for the first time it no longer hurt. As I stood there, taking in the quiet absurdity of it all, I realized something profound. My entire life, I had been trying to prove my worth to these people who would never fully see me. My father's callous remark about Alex having a family was the last straw. I had been playing the role of the dutiful daughter, always in the background, always second to Alex's accomplishments. The home he was getting wasn't just a physical space. It was the embodiment of everything I had missed out on. It was the reward for being their perfect child while I was left to fend for myself. I felt the knot in my stomach twist tighter. This was more than just a house. It was the epitome of years of favoritism, neglect, and emotional manipulation. I had always been content with staying in the background, trying to play nice, but now, standing there holding those socks, I realized that I didn't have to accept this anymore. A cold calmness settled over me. I was no longer that little girl trying to win their approval. In that moment, a quiet but powerful realization washed over me. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their recognition. I needed to take control of my life, and I would do it on my terms, no longer bound by their expectations. As my father handed me the socks, I felt a surge of disbelief. The gesture was so trivial, so insignificant, yet it felt like the culmination of everything I had tried to endure. There I was, standing in the living room, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. "Your brother deserved the new home," he had said, his tone indifferent, almost dismissive. "He actually has a family. Your family doesn't matter at all. And just like that, he handed me a pair of socks, as if it was all I deserved. I stood there, frozen for a moment as the words sank in. I had expected more, an explanation, a moment of empathy, anything that could show me that my existence mattered to them. But all I received was the cold reality of their indifference. I took the socks without a word, forcing a smile as if everything was fine. But inside, a storm raged. I wanted to shout, to scream, to demand some kind of recognition or respect. But I didn't. I stayed silent. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn their love, their approval. I would do anything to be seen, to be noticed. Yet, every time I was left disappointed. From my earliest memories, I had tried to shine in their eyes. I remember when I was just a child, writing a poem for my father's birthday, hoping it would be the one thing that would make him proud. But he didn't even read it. Instead, he brushed it aside, only to lavish praise on Alex for something as trivial as a school project. In my teenage years, I worked harder than ever, hoping that the better grades, the successful achievements would finally earn me the acknowledgement I craved. But it was always the same. Alex's accomplishments were always more important. He was the one who could do no wrong. He was the one who mattered. And now, years later, I was still the same person, silent, unnoticed, unimportant. But something had shifted inside me. As I stood there, staring at the socks in my hands, I felt a quiet strength welling up inside me. I was done. I didn't need to fight for their attention anymore. I had been seeking their approval for so long. But now I realized it wasn't worth the cost. I was worth more than the scraps they offered. It was time to stop trying to prove my value to them. I wouldn't engage in the emotional outbursts they were used to seeing from me. I would stay calm, silent, and firm. I would show them that I could thrive without their validation. And with that realization, my decision was made. As I stood there in the quiet aftermath of my father's dismissal, the weight of it all began to settle into my bones. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the anger and hurt threatening to break free. But I couldn't let it. I had spent so many years trying to fight for something that was never going to come. Their love, their respect, their recognition. It was always just out of reach, no matter how hard I tried. I had spent years sacrificing pieces of myself for them. Countless hours helping my father with his business, listening to my mother's endless complaints, putting my own dreams on hold to play the dutiful child they expected. Every time I made a sacrifice, I thought it would bring me closer to being seen, to being valued. But it never did. I always felt like a shadow in their lives, never the priority, never the focus. I thought back to those moments, the countless times I had put aside my own feelings to support them, only to be met with disappointment. I remembered the time I had sacrificed my college savings to help pay off one of their debts, only for them to brush me off when I needed their help in return. I thought of all the birthday dinners I attended alone, missing out on family gatherings and being left out of conversations because I didn't fit into their picture of the perfect family. Every effort I made to bond with them felt like I was pushing against a wall, never able to break through. The sacrifices had been so one-sided. I had given them everything I had, my time, my energy, my love, hoping it would be enough. But it wasn't. They took and took, without ever considering what I needed in return. It was always about them, always about Alex, always about their needs and expectations. And what did I get in return? A pair of socks. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. I had spent my life bending over backwards for them. And for what? A life where I was never enough. A life where my worth was measured only by what I could give. But not anymore. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly sacrificing my happiness, my self-worth, just to get scraps of affection. It was time to stop enabling their behavior, time to stop giving them the power to take from me. I had always been too afraid to break free, afraid of what they might think, afraid of disappointing them. But that fear had kept me stuck in a cycle of bitterness and regret. It was time to take control of my own life. The decision came quietly, almost as if it was always there, waiting for the right moment. I wasn't going to shout or scream. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to act silently, decisively. I would remove my name from their utilities. They would no longer be able to use me as their financial safety net. I wasn't going to be their last resort anymore. If they wanted help, they would have to find it elsewhere. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about finally setting a boundary, a line in the sand that I was no longer willing to let them cross. I had spent my entire life trying to prove myself to them, but I was done. This would be my quiet declaration of independence. As I made the decision, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I felt empowered. Not by loud words, not by a dramatic confrontation, but by my quiet strength, my ability to walk away from the chains that had held me for so long. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about reclaiming my life. And that was all that mattered now. The air in the room felt thick with tension as my father's words hung in the space between us. "Your brother deserved the new home," he said, almost dismissively, as he continued sorting through his papers. "He actually has family. Your family doesn't matter at all." I stood there, the weight of his words pressing against my chest, but I didn't flinch. I had been hearing these things for years, the way my parents had always placed Alex on a pedestal, praised him for things I had worked so hard for, and let me slip into the shadows. The truth wasn't new. It was just the rawness of it, the utter finality in his voice that stung. My father turned, oblivious to the hurt he had just caused, and handed me a pair of socks. His usual way of helping, when he couldn't be bothered to offer anything real. He expected a thank you or some kind of expression of gratitude, but all I could feel was the emptiness that had grown inside me over the years. They had always seen me as someone who would accept whatever they handed me, no matter how little or meaningless it was, and I had always played along until now. My heart raced as the words formed in my mind, but I kept my face calm, the mask firmly in place. I wasn't going to let him see the hurt, not this time. I wasn't going to beg for validation or approval. I had done that for too long. I knew now that no matter how hard I tried, I would never be the child they wanted me to be, the child who could please them, make them proud. I would never be good enough in their eyes. But something inside me snapped. As the realization settled, my composure shifted. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady but firm. "Okay, just don't ask me for money for your bills anymore," I said, my words simple but powerful. "You've got Alex now. Let him take care of it." There was a brief, stunned silence. My father raised an eyebrow, as if he couldn't quite comprehend what I had just said. He laughed, almost dismissively, assuming that I was bluffing, that I would never go through with it. "What are you talking about?" he asked with a half smirk. "Your brother doesn't need to pay the bills. You've always been the one to help us out." I didn't respond right away. I could feel the surge of emotions pushing against the calm front I had carefully constructed, but I held it together. I didn't need to argue, didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to shout or cry or plead. I had already made up my mind. My decision was made, and it wasn't just words anymore. It was action, and I would follow through. It wasn't about getting revenge. It was about putting an end to the cycle. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my strength, my autonomy. It was about showing them once and for all that I would no longer be their fallback, their financial crutch, their punching bag. They had treated me like an afterthought, and I had accepted it for far too long. But no more. I watched my father's face, trying to gauge his reaction, but he seemed almost dismissive, his confidence unshaken. He thought I was bluffing, just like always. He laughed again, this time a little more nervously, but I didn't flinch. I stood there, knowing that this was the moment. I was letting go, silently but decisively. I had made my decision. I had drawn my line in the sand, and this time they wouldn't cross it. It took everything in me not to break down in that moment. The years of silence, the years of being disregarded, the years of emotional neglect, they all came rushing to the surface. But I didn't let it show. I was stronger now, stronger than I had ever been before. I wasn't going to let them see me break. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. They had pushed me too far, and I had finally reached my limit. As I turned away, I felt the weight of the decision settling in. It was painful, yes, but it was also freeing. The silence of my response said everything I needed to say. I wasn't going to beg for their love anymore. I wasn't going to play their games. I was going to stand on my own, and I was going to do it quietly with dignity. The emotional toll was immense, but in that moment, I felt a small seed of peace. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for me. And that was all that mattered now. The days that followed were strangely quiet. It felt almost like waiting for a storm to pass, the kind of quiet before everything changes. I spent my time thinking, reflecting, planning. My decision to cut off my financial ties with my parents was already made. I had removed my name from the utilities, the accounts that had always tethered me to them. It wasn't just about the money, it was about making a statement. I wasn't going to be the one they relied on anymore. They had always assumed that I'd be there, ready to pay the bills, to step in when things got difficult. But not this time. This time, I was going to let them feel what it was like to have the ground pulled out from under them, to have the reality of their dependence on me set in. The mail arrived just as it always did, routine, predictable. But this time there was a sense of anticipation hanging in the air. I didn't open the mailbox myself. I knew that would come later, when they would finally notice, when they would start to realize that things weren't right. And then it happened. It was a Saturday morning when I heard the first sounds of confusion from inside the house. I was sitting in my room, quietly sipping my coffee, pretending I didn't hear the rising tension outside. My father's voice, always so authoritative, suddenly faltered. "Where's the bill for the electricity?" he called to my mother. "I'm sure it came today." There was a pause, a slight shift in the rhythm of the house. My mother's voice followed, sharper than usual. "It should be here, but I don't see it." The silence stretched, and then I heard my father's footsteps heading towards the front door. I knew exactly what was happening. He was checking the mailbox. I sat there, calm and still, as the moments dragged on. The minutes felt like hours. My heart pounded, but not out of fear or anxiety. It was satisfaction, a quiet, unspoken satisfaction. The satisfaction of knowing I had finally taken control of the situation. I had set the wheels in motion, and now they were starting to turn. "Something's wrong," my father said, his voice growing louder as he returned to the living room. "The utilities bill, it's not here. And it's not in my name anymore." I could hear the panic in his voice now, the confusion as the reality began to sink in. He called my mother again, his words almost frantic, but she didn't have an answer. "That's impossible," she said, her voice wavering. "It should be on the system." I remained in my room, unmoved by their increasing panic. It wasn't like I was expecting them to understand right away, but hearing the realization dawn on them, hearing the shock in their voices, was its own kind of power. I had taken control without a single shout, without a single confrontation. No accusations, no angry words. Just silence. And that silence had spoken louder than anything else could have. The next few hours were a blur of the frantic attempts to call the utility companies, trying to get answers, scrambling to figure out what had happened. But it didn't matter. The deed was done. There was no turning back. And as I sat there, listening to their panic unfold, I felt a quiet sense of victory. It wasn't a victory won through anger or revenge. It wasn't even about them, not really. It was about me, about reclaiming my power, about no longer letting them manipulate me or control my life. They would never know how much it had cost me to reach this point, how much I had suffered silently over the years. But now they would feel the consequences of their actions, and I would walk away, silently, knowing that I had finally taken control. No words needed to be said. The silence spoke for itself. The following days were filled with frantic calls from my parents, none of which I answered. I could hear the desperation in their voices through the voicemail messages they left, pleas for help, for explanations, for me to just come back and fix it. My father's usually steady voice was now unrecognizable, cracked with frustration. He didn't understand. He couldn't. My mother's tone was even more pleading, trying to appeal to my guilt, reminding me of everything she had done for me, every little thing she had given me, the sacrifices she had made. But her words, once so powerful, now fell hollow, as if she too knew that it was too late. The power dynamic had shifted, and I wasn't coming back to fix things for them anymore. I didn't feel anger. In fact, I wasn't even particularly upset. All I felt was a deep, quiet sense of calm. I had no intention of running back to their rescue. I was no longer their safety net, their emotional crutch, or their ATM. I had done what I had needed to do for myself, and now I was standing firmly in my own independence. I was free, but as I watched them scramble, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice in the situation. For years, I had been their quiet enabler, letting them lean on me, taking on their burdens, cleaning up their messes, all while they treated me as less than. But now they were facing the consequences of their own actions. They had no choice but to confront their dependency, and it was a hard pill to swallow. It was strange to witness their panic, especially after all the times they had disregarded my feelings, minimized my needs, and invalidated my existence. Now they were the ones feeling vulnerable, helpless, and exposed. I had been so used to this pattern of imbalance, always giving, never receiving, but now the scales had tipped, and it was them who had to confront their own shortcomings. I had always thought that cutting them off would bring me a sense of revenge or relief, but it wasn't like that at all. There was no bitterness or resentment in my heart. Instead, there was a growing sense of pride, a quiet pride that came from knowing I had taken control of my own life. I wasn't defined by their expectations anymore, nor by their toxic influence. For the first time, I was standing alone, and it felt empowering. There was a small part of me that knew I could have told them everything. The reasons behind my actions, the pain I had endured, the years I had wasted hoping for love and respect that would never come. But I didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. I had done what was necessary for my own peace, and they would have to figure things out on their own now. As I reflected on all that had happened, I realized how much I had grown. I had found strength in my silence, in my ability to detach from a family that had never truly seen me for who I was. I had discovered my own worth, not through their validation, but through my own actions. And now, as I watched them face the fallout, I knew that this was the beginning of something new. I had chosen self-sufficiency over dependence, independence over obligation, and that was the most powerful choice I could have made. I was free, and for the first time in my life, I was at peace. The days that followed were quieter than I had expected. The phone calls, the desperate attempts to get me back into their web of manipulation, dwindled away. My parents' panic became more of a distant noise, something I could almost ignore entirely. I had turned away from their chaotic demands, choosing instead to focus on the steady rhythm of my life, one that no longer included the heavy burden of their expectations. As I sat in my living room, sipping a cup of tea, I thought back on the person I had been before all of this. The person who had always tried to please, always tried to fix things, always sought validation from people who had never truly cared. I had spent so much of my life caught in a cycle of giving and hoping for love in return, only to be met with dismissal, selfishness, and indifference. I had been living in their shadow, bending over backward to be someone they could accept. But now I was free. And the beauty of it wasn't in the moment of revenge, in the removal of my name from their bills, or in watching them scramble. No, the peace I felt wasn't born from the harm I had caused them. It was born from the quiet strength I had discovered within myself, from the realization that I no longer needed their approval, their love, or their acceptance to define who I was. Looking at myself in the mirror one morning, I saw the change. There was no longer the fragile hope in my eyes that once believed family could offer unconditional love. I had stopped seeking it. Instead, what I saw was a woman who had learned to stand on her own 2 feet, a woman who had learned to protect her own peace, even if it meant walking away from people she once thought she could never live without. My parents were facing the consequences of their selfishness now. Without my financial support, they were scrambling to figure out how to keep up with their bills, their lifestyle, the things they had relied on me to handle for years. It wasn't easy for them, and I wasn't blind to their struggle. But I wasn't responsible for their choices anymore, and that realization brought me peace. They were adults who had made their own decisions, and now it was time for them to face the results of those decisions. I didn't need to say anything to them anymore. They had heard everything they needed to hear in the silence I had given them. And now I walked away with dignity, no more fights, no more desperate pleas for my attention. I didn't owe them anything, and I wasn't going to feel guilty for finally taking control of my own life. The final moment of peace came one evening when I sat on my porch watching the sunset. The sky was a soft blend of orange and pink, and the air was calm. For the first time in years, I felt like I had finally exhaled. No longer tethered to a family that had drained me, I was free. The weight had lifted, and what replaced it was a sense of self-worth that no one could take away from me. As the day faded into night, I closed my eyes, letting the stillness wash over me. The final chapter of that chapter in my life had been written, and I was proud of the person I had become. I no longer needed anything from them, except perhaps the lesson they had taught me, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away with grace and strength and let time reveal the truth. And that's exactly what I did, just as I was setting my coffee mug down and settling into my worn-out desk chair. The number was unfamiliar, flashing urgently across my phone screen. Something in my gut twisted even before I answered. "Hello, is this Emily Carter?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "This is Charles from Liberty National Bank. We're calling regarding your overdue mortgage balance of $523,000. We've sent several notices, but..." The words blurred. Mortgage? $523,000? I didn't own a house. I didn't even own a new car. "You must have the wrong person," I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound calm. "Ma'am, the documents we have show your full name, date of birth, and social security number. You are listed as the primary borrower on the loan taken out 3 years ago." 3 years ago. My heart dropped. That was around the time Jessica, my younger sister, had been talking about wanting a bigger house, one she couldn't afford. I sat frozen, the hum of my computer fan filling the silence. My mind raced, flipping through memories I didn't even know I was storing. Jessica flashing Pinterest boards at family dinners. My parents gushing about how Jessica deserves the best. How we all pitch in for family. But pitch in like this? After hanging up with the bank, promising to look into it when I could barely breathe, I pressed my palms to my eyes hard. My small, one-bedroom apartment around me suddenly felt like it was caving in. There had to be a mistake. There had to be. I rifled through my drawers, pulling out every old document I had, praying I would find some clue that proved it wasn't me. But deep down, the icy grip of betrayal had already begun to wrap around my ribs. Because if it wasn't a mistake, there was only one explanation. I thought about how my parents always called me the responsible one. The one who didn't need help, who wouldn't make a fuss. Meanwhile, Jessica flitted from one bad decision to another, cushioned by Mom's whispered excuses and Dad's tired sighs. It had always been that way. I was the background character in my own family, useful, dependable, invisible. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of my desk. Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about being treated like my future, my life, was something they could casually sign away without even a warning. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from my mother. "Hey, sweetheart. Hope you're having a good week. Family dinner Sunday." Family dinner. Like everything was normal. Like my name wasn't tied to $500,000 of debt I didn't sign for. The taste in my mouth turned bitter. I typed back, sure, and hit send. Because before anything else, before accusations or screaming matches, I needed to know the whole truth. And when I found it, I would decide exactly how loud or how silent my response would be. And something deep inside me promised, this time I wouldn't stay invisible. The next morning, after a sleepless night of staring at the cracks in my ceiling, I sat hunched over the kitchen table, a steaming cup of untouched coffee beside me. My laptop was open, tabs multiplying like weeds, mortgage fraud, forged signatures, legal advice blogs, warning signs of identity theft. But none of it prepared me for what I was about to see. I called the bank again, requesting a copy of the mortgage documents. The woman on the line was polite, almost mechanical, as she emailed them over within minutes. When the PDF opened, my breath caught in my throat. There it was, page after page, filled with my name, my information, and my signature. Except it wasn't mine. It looked close enough that someone who didn't know better might not notice. But I knew every curve of my real signature, every little tremble in my hand. This one was too perfect, too rehearsed. It felt like staring into a cracked mirror. I zoomed in, studying the slanted loops, the heavy tail on the Y, in Emily the way Carter was spelled just a little too neatly. My hand started to tremble. How could they do this? How could my own parents? The floor seemed to shift under me. I grabbed the edge of the table, grounding myself. I kept flipping through the pages, heart pounding harder with every line. Every loan term, every initial scribbled on the margins, every signature. It was like watching someone rob me in slow motion. And the worst part was, They hadn't even thought I deserved to be warned. I thought about every family holiday where Jessica was treated like royalty and I was expected to smile and clap from the sidelines. Every time I picked up the check because, "You're doing better right now, sweetheart." Doing better until now. The walls of my small kitchen seemed to close in tighter. I closed my eyes, letting the storm churn inside me. No tears. Not yet. Only a growing, hollow ache. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't come with screaming or slammed doors. It was quiet, sharp, like a scalpel sliding under the skin. I started gathering every scrap of paper that tied me to them financially. Old bank statements, credit reports, even birthday cards where they joked about the responsible daughter. Evidence. I didn't know exactly what I would do with it yet, but I knew I needed to protect myself. As the hours crawled by, memories flashed behind my eyes like a cruel movie reel. Jessica showing off her new car after flunking out of college. Mom telling me, "You're the strong one, Emmy. Jess needs a little extra." Dad patting my head like a dog when I graduated without anyone showing up to the ceremony. They had always expected me to carry the weight, to be the net when Jessica fell. This time, they hadn't even bothered to ask. They just signed my future away, assuming I would never fight back. By evening, a neat pile of documents sat on the kitchen table, a silent promise to myself. The girl who once bent over backwards to be the good daughter was gone. Now, I wasn't sure exactly who I was becoming, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't stay silent forever. Sunday came too fast. I stood in front of my parents' house, the house where I grew up, staring at the door like it was the entrance to a courtroom. A part of me wanted to turn around, to pretend none of this had happened, to stay the invisible daughter who didn't cause trouble. But another part, the part they didn't know they'd created, steeled my spine. I knocked once, twice. The door swung open, and there was my mother, beaming like everything was perfect. "Emmy, so glad you could make it, sweetheart." "Sweetheart." I stepped inside. The familiar smell of pot roast and lemon cleaner hit me all at once, dragging me back to 100 childhood memories. Only now they felt hollow. Dad was in the living room, half watching a football game, beer balanced on the armrest. Jessica sat curled up on the couch, scrolling on her phone, expensive purse tossed carelessly beside her. None of them even glanced at me properly. I took a seat quietly, my heart pounding so loud it felt like the walls should shake. I waited, let them get comfortable, let them reveal themselves. Dinner was served like any other Sunday. Laughter, chatter, Jessica complaining about how expensive landscaping was for her stupid big yard. Dad grunting about the game. Mom doting on Jessica like she hung the moon. Finally, after the plates were cleared, I spoke. "Hey, I have a question," I said, my voice low but steady. 3 sets of eyes turned toward me, mildly curious, like I was about to ask if they'd seen my missing scarf. "Does anyone know anything about a mortgage with my name on it?" Silence. A full, thick silence that made the ticking of the wall clock deafening. Jessica was the first to react. She shifted, pulling her sleeves down nervously. Mom's smile faltered. Dad coughed into his hand. I kept my expression calm, almost blank. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just waited. Mom was the first to break. "Honey, listen," she started, reaching across the table like we were discussing the weather. "It's not a big deal. It's family. Jessica just needed a little help qualifying for her loan. That's all. It's not like you're actually paying anything." "Not a big deal." Jessica chimed in, voice defensive. "You have good credit, Em." "I don't. It's not fair that you wouldn't help. It's just paperwork." Just paperwork. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle around me like ash. They didn't even think it was wrong. They had convinced themselves it was normal, that I was the bad guy for being upset. I nodded slowly, keeping my face carefully neutral. "Thanks for explaining," I said quietly. Jessica shrugged, already reaching for her phone again, as if the matter was closed. Mom beamed like she had soothed a silly little tantrum. Dad turned back to the game. None of them saw the storm brewing behind my calm eyes. They thought the old Emily was still sitting there. They didn't realize yet that the real storm would hit when they least expected it. and it would be silent until it wasn't. The drive home was a blur. Streetlights streaked across the windshield, but I barely saw them. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The faint hum of the tires on the pavement, the only sound in the car. Inside, though, it was anything but quiet. Their words spun around in my head like a cruel carousel. It's just paperwork. It's not a big deal. Family helps family. I thought about every sacrifice I had made. Every time I swallowed disappointment to keep the peace. Every time I picked up Jessica's mess behind the scenes. And for what? So they could handcuff me to a $523,000 debt without even a phone call? I pulled into my driveway and sat there, staring at the darkened outline of my small house. For a long time, I didn't move. I let the betrayal settle deeper into my bones, burning a hole I knew would never fully heal. But I also realized something else. This was the moment they had finally freed me, not by choice, not by apology, but by stripping away every last illusion I had clung to about who they were, about what family meant. There was nothing left to protect anymore. No love to cling to, hoping it would fix itself. They had drawn the line. Now I would decide what side I stood on. I went inside, changed into my oldest sweatshirt, and opened my laptop again. This time I didn't search for advice. I searched for answers. Solutions. Lawyers who specialized in mortgage fraud. Articles about suing family members. Steps to remove your name from a fraudulent loan. The world felt colder, sharper. But for the first time in a long time, I felt awake. I stayed up late into the night, reading, taking notes, mapping out everything. If they had expected me to roll over and cry about it, they didn't know me at all. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw fits or demand apologies that would never come. I was going to be smarter, quieter, deadlier. I thought about every moment they had made me feel small. Mom brushing off my college acceptance with a distracted, "That's nice, honey." Dad laughing when I told him about the promotion I earned without anyone's help, Jessica sneering, "Not everyone's perfect like you." I wasn't perfect. I had just been surviving, carrying the weight they tossed aside without a second thought. And now I would carry my own weight, and I would watch them crumble under the one they tried to pin on me. As the clock struck 2 a.m., I closed the laptop and sat back, exhaustion washing over me. But it wasn't the hopeless exhaustion I'd felt before. This time, it was the heavy calm of someone who had made a decision. I would free myself. I would protect my future. And when they realized what I had done, it would already be too late. Some lessons cost nothing. Some lessons cost everything. They were about to learn the difference. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was strange how betrayal, once fully realized, could sharpen the mind instead of breaking it. I called out of work, telling my boss I needed a personal day. She didn't ask questions. I think she heard something different in my voice, a quiet finality that didn't invite small talk. My first stop was a local coffee shop not far from downtown. It was quiet, tucked between a florist and a bookstore. The kind of place where secrets could be discussed without anyone caring enough to listen. I sat at a corner table, nursing a bitter black coffee, waiting for my appointment. At exactly 9 a.m., he arrived. Mr. Warner, a real estate attorney recommended by a friend, someone known for being discreet and ruthless when necessary. He was older, sharp-eyed, with the no-nonsense energy of someone who had seen too many ugly family battles to be fazed by one more. I handed him the documents I had gathered, the mortgage papers with my name plastered across them, the letters from the bank demanding payments, my credit report showing the hit my score had taken. Mr. Warner flipped through the stack methodically, eyebrows drawing together slightly. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at me steadily. "You understand what this means, right?" he asked. I nodded. They committed fraud. Identity theft, technically. It's criminal. Hearing those words out loud felt like a punch and a bomb all at once. Fraud. Identity theft. Not just family drama. Not just a misunderstanding. Crimes. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just leaned in and asked the only question that mattered. How do I fix it? Over the next 2 hours, Mr. Warner laid out the plan. File a police report. Notify the bank in writing, officially disputing the loan. Begin proceedings to have my name legally removed. Sue, if necessary, for damages. It wouldn't be fast. It wouldn't be easy. And it would absolutely destroy whatever fragile ties remained with my family. But it would also save my future. As I listened, taking notes carefully, I realized something important. I wasn't doing this to them. I was doing this for me. They had made their choices. I was just choosing differently now. When the meeting ended, Mr. Warner shook my hand firmly. "You're doing the right thing, Emily," he said. "Don't let guilt make you weak." I tucked his card into my wallet and left the cafe, stepping into the bright, unforgiving sunlight. Outside, life moved on. People laughed, cars honked, a mother scolded her child lovingly on the sidewalk. I realized, standing there, that my life could move on too. Without them. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. And for the first time, that was enough. The police station smelled faintly of old coffee and something metallic, like worn-out filing cabinets. I stood at the counter, feeling oddly detached as I explained to the officer that I needed to file a report for identity theft. When he asked for the details, I handed over the thick file Mr. Warner had helped me compile, documents, timelines, copies of my ID, the fraudulent loan papers. As the officer flipped through them, I caught a flicker of something across his face. Recognition, disbelief, maybe even a small flash of anger on my behalf. "You sure you want to move forward with this?" he asked quietly, glancing up at me. "If I don't," I said evenly, "they'll keep taking from me." He nodded, stamped the papers, and handed me a copy of the report. It was official now. From there, the dominoes began to fall faster than I had even dared hope. I mailed the certified letter to the bank that same afternoon, attaching the police report and a formal dispute notice. I remember standing at the post office counter, the pen trembling slightly in my hand as I signed the last form. Not from fear, from the weight of finality. There would be no taking this back. The next few days passed in a tense, eerie silence. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Jessica. I didn't warn them. Instead, I waited. 3 days later, my mother showed up unannounced at my doorstep. I watched her from the window before opening the door. She looked disheveled, furious, and beneath it all, terrified. When I finally opened it, I didn't invite her inside. She launched into it without even a greeting. "How dare you involve the police? Do you know what you've done to this family?" I listened quietly, letting her words bounce off me like rubber bullets. "I trusted you to be understanding," she hissed. "Jessica needed help. Family sticks together." I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "No," I said softly. "Family asks. They don't steal." Her face reddened, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You've ruined everything," she cried. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I kept my voice level, my words like knives wrapped in velvet. "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped cleaning up your messes." And then, without another word, I closed the door. It was the most powerful sound I had ever made, that soft click as the latch caught. I stood there on the other side, heart pounding, but not from regret. From release. Later that night, Jessica tried calling me. 12 missed calls. A string of desperate, angry voicemails. I deleted them without listening. The bank responded within a week. They suspended the loan, pending investigation, and issued a formal apology for their role in the ordeal. The legal process would still drag on for months, but I had taken the first steps. The right steps. And my family? Their world, built on lies and entitlement, was finally starting to crack. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to fight. All I had to do was stand still while the truth did its work. And somehow that was so much sweeter. In the weeks that followed, the silence grew thick around me. No more surprise visits. No more frantic calls. No more guilt-drenched texts from relatives telling me to just forgive and forget. It was as if I had been erased from the family group chat, from holiday plans, from their carefully curated image of unity. At first, the loneliness was suffocating. Even when the betrayal cuts deep, there's a part of you, the child still craving approval, that aches when the ties finally snap. But slowly, something else took root inside me. Peace. Real peace. I found myself doing things I had neglected for years. I spent Saturdays wandering through farmers markets, buying sunflowers for my kitchen table. I started hiking local trails, breathing in the cool morning air and feeling the earth steady beneath my feet. I enrolled in a pottery class on a whim, my hands clumsy, but my spirit somehow lighter each time I shaped something new from the raw clay. There was something beautiful about rebuilding, not loudly, not for show, but quietly, piece by fragile piece. The legal process continued in the background. I responded to emails from Mr. Warner, signed affidavits, collected updates about the loan's slow unwinding. Each time I saw an official letter with my name on it, Emily Parker, it reminded me, this name is mine. This life is mine. Not a gift from my parents. Not an obligation to my sister. Mine. The strangest part was realizing that, deep down, I didn't want revenge the way I once thought I would. I didn't want to see Jessica lose everything. I didn't want my parents dragged through public shame. I just wanted distance. Freedom. A chance to live without carrying the invisible weight of debts I never agreed to bear. One evening, a few months after it all began, I sat on my small apartment balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker to life. I thought about the girl I had been, the one who kept saying yes out of fear, who kept absorbing every blow like it was her duty. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, quiet, steady, unbreakable in a way no shouting match could ever achieve. A soft breeze lifted the edge of the old throw blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I smiled into the darkness and whispered the words I had waited a lifetime to believe. I owe them nothing. Not anger. Not explanations. Not even forgiveness on their timeline. Just silence. And in that silence, I finally found myself. The final confrontation wasn't loud. It wasn't a screaming match or a tearful apology. It wasn't anything dramatic at all. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, almost a year after everything had started. I had just come back from a pottery fair, arms full of handmade mugs and bowls, when I saw them, my parents and Jessica, standing awkwardly outside my apartment building. They looked smaller somehow. Jessica's once perfect hair was unkempt, her eyes darting around nervously. My mother clutched her purse so tightly that her knuckles were white. And my father, the man who once bellowed that family was about loyalty, couldn't even meet my gaze. They were losing everything. The bank's investigation had triggered a cascade of consequences. Jessica's loan had defaulted. The house she was so proud of was foreclosed. And with it, their carefully built illusion of control crumbled. I paused on the sidewalk, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows around us. They must have seen the change in me, because for the first time in my life, they didn't bark orders or demand explanations. They pleaded. "Emily," my mother began, voice trembling. "We made a mistake, but we're still family." Jessica stepped forward, her voice thin and desperate. "I need your help, just for a little while. Please don't turn your back on us." There was no anger inside me anymore. No burning need to lash out or make them suffer. Just a deep, calm certainty. I set down my bags slowly and stood up straight. I looked at each of them, really looked, at their faces full of fear, regret, and the realization that I no longer belonged to them. They hadn't come because they loved me. They had come because they needed something from me again. And this time, there would be nothing to take. "I hope," I said, my voice steady and clear, "that one day you understand what real family means. But it's not something you can steal, or fake, or demand when it's convenient." I picked up my bags again, feeling the weight of them, solid and real in my hands. "And as for me," I added quietly, "I'm finally free, and I'm not coming back." Their faces crumpled, my mother's mouth opening in protest, Jessica's eyes welling with tears. But I didn't wait to hear what they said next. I turned, walked past them, and never looked back. As I reached the stairs to my apartment, I paused for just a moment, the afternoon breeze ruffling my hair. I whispered, not to them, but to myself, "Sometimes walking away is the loudest thing you'll ever say." And with that, I climbed the stairs, step by step, leaving behind everything that had once broken me, and ahead of me, a life that was finally beautifully mine.